Hello everyone and welcome back to the NPC Dungeon, where I'm your host and game master for the time being, as always. Today it's story time once again. We're going back to Bonk this time for good for now. I'll return to our little friend in a while, so don't worry. Also, if you haven't listened to the other stories of the Bonk series yet, I recommend you go ahead and do that now before moving on to this one, because this one does pick up right where my last one left off. I even have a whole playlist on YouTube that I'll be showing right about now in the corner of your screen as a little card if you're listening to this on YouTube. I also want to go ahead and say that this episode gets just a little bit intense, and I don't know how many of you out there listen to this show with your kids, but if you do, you might want to go ahead and give this one a little bit of a listen first before you do that, just as a little heads up. But before we get into that, I want to repeat an announcement that I made at the end of my other episode this week. It was the second in my series on immersion, and it went over the most potent tools that I have for immersion. So if you're interested in that, feel free to go ahead and check that one out. And as for the announcement, I said that I was going to start splitting up my DM advice episodes on YouTube in two parts. They'll both be released in the same week as my podcast episode that week that will cover the same material in one episode, and they'll be released in the same day. This will start next week. I'm also considering publishing my D&D story episodes on Tuesdays, while I keep releasing my DM advice episodes on Fridays. And in case you haven't noticed yet, all my D&D story episodes are now actually labeled D&D story instead of just story. Again, I want to make these as easy as possible for all of you to find. And with all that out of the way, let's move on with the story. So, what happened? Well, where we left off last time, my players, whose characters named V and 57, met the newest member of their party, the Dragonborn Paladin named Grieve, and together they ventured into a cave of floofs and bested an ettercap that threatened to destroy a sacred monument of theirs. The floofs then ushered them into another part of the cave, this part inhabited by an underground city of Kotoa fish people. The city seemed abandoned, and the majority of the people looked as though they were engaged in some kind of ritual far below the party on the lowest level of the city. Grieve fell to a stampede of hook horrors, only to be revived by V's warlock patron, and they all soon reconvened at a tower inhabited by what appeared to be some sort of priestly leader of these people. After V convinced him that they were representatives of his god, and he revealed that he and his followers intended to sacrifice none other than Bonk himself, along with the little fish he escaped with, 57, a flood of red-hot anger washing over him at seeing the pair that lit their boat ablaze and made off, ripped the bottle away from Bonk, threw it on the ground, and stomped the little fish. Bonk, obviously not very fond of this decision, tackled him out of the window as one does. 57 survived, but Bonk didn't make it, so 57 threw him over the ledge to the bottom layer of the city, and the fish priest announced that the sacrifice, nonetheless, had been made. He led them to the ledge to a massive winding spiral staircase, and this is where we begin. The Winged One is a mysterious being, the fish priest droned on for the 1,000th time as he led the three down the rickety stone staircase, jutting out of the cave wall down the cylindrical underground city. Yes, very mysterious, he continued absent-mindedly, but it is the object of our worship nonetheless. V, perhaps admittedly the littlest bit curious about their culture, even if it was only to help them survive, was just about to ask who this Winged One was, but thought better of it, remembering the lie he told the fishman. You can't claim to be messengers of someone's god, and then admit that you don't know anything about that god. So he just continued on with the rest. That was until he felt a hard dragonoid elbow jam its scales into his gut. Hey, what's the deal, said V. You trying to knock me off the ledge? No, I just wanted to get your attention. Your patron, Creep said. He brought me back, sure, but at what cost? What does he want from me? V shook his head. I don't know about your back. I'm sorry about my methods, but that has to account for something, doesn't it? I don't know, said Creep. He looked away for a second, but thank you anyway. V nodded. But Creep wasn't done yet. And you, he said, turning to 57. What was that back there? 57 glanced down. It destroyed our boat. And, Creep retorted, that's not an excuse. I hate side against you like this, V resumed, but I have to agree with him. Yeah, I know. But, V said, looking down at the fish timidly swirling around in the bottle, it's still alive, and that's something. I'll make up for it, said 57. We all will, said V. Speak for yourselves, Creep spat. I didn't do any of this. Is this just what you do? You do this kind of stuff all the time? But, and probably for the better, before the other two could answer, their feet hit the bottom of the stairs, and before them were more of these fish people than any of them thought could fit into the city, all crowded around a black disc floating just above the ground before a small wooden pedestal. Upon their arrival, the fish people cheered, and the priest announced their companions as messengers of this Winged One, there to oversee their ritual, as he strode to the pedestal, leading the party along. As the priest continued to drone on, a voice pierced into 57's head, followed by a splitting headache. He saw flashes of the disc. He saw the priest, hands clasped over a mysterious dagger, ready to plunge it into the void hovering in front of him. You must allow them to break the seal, the voice said. Do this, and power will be yours. Power beyond your imagination, all under your command. He didn't have to tell 57 twice. When he came to, his vision became a reality. The priest held a dagger above his head and brought it down over the disc. Creed didn't know what this was, but he did know that he didn't like it one one bit. He rushed over to the priest, but 57 stood in his way. What are you doing? Kriv demanded. He shoved past 57, but was just out of time. 57 stalled him just for long enough to allow the dagger to pierce the inky blackness as ooze sprayed from the thing. Kriv turned to 57. What were you thinking? I don't know, there was a thing, a voice, said 57. But before he could continue, the same voice spoke out once again, this time to all three of them. The same voice, and each one recognized it. Yes, after 1,000 years I am free. You will not regret this, much to do. They understood and cried out to it, but it was gone. But they had other matters to tend to. More fish people rushed across the ground, Bonk's body in tow. They tossed into the torrent of black ooze, and no sooner than did he touch the surface than did his eyes shoot open, and did he cry out, splashing around in the swirling portal. It grabbed him and tried to pull him in, but V wasn't going to allow it. He ran over to him and grabbed him by his hand, dodging blasts of black ooze as they erupted all around them. Acidic pain coated his skin, but it was worth it. Hey, you two, he shouted to his companions. Get that blade. Already on it, 57 shouted back, lunging for the priest. But the fish priest simply raised his arms as a massive bird clad in red feathers with a bony head shot out from the portal and rose above them, swooping up overhead. I'll handle that thing, Kriv cried, arcing out a blast of holy fire from his hands at the beast. It danced in the air, narrowly avoiding it until a single flame clipped its wing, but it brushed it off and angled itself downward, grabbing some of the fish people below with its talons, flying back up and dropping them onto the ground. The fish priest jumped past 57's strike and held his hands up. The gems covering his robes began to glow as streaks of magical light came barreling after him. 57 tried to dodge, but he couldn't escape them all. They slammed into him one by one, throwing him into a crowd of fish people who grasped him by the arms and shoulders. It seemed hopeless until he remembered. Power, the voice had promised him. He was out of options. It was his last hope. He threw his hands forward, manifesting primal claws out of his ooze hands, and slashed wildly, slipping away from their grasp and narrowing his eyes on at the priest, already turned around and sprinting away. 57 gave chase as V redoubled his efforts at Bonk. His floof joined in the effort, but he didn't budge. He summoned a floating, disembodied mage hand to grasp as well, but this Bullywug was too stuck. He went in for one final try as Kriv held out his axe, igniting it into flames with the power of his devotion. He stood firm as the creature rushed him, but Kriv had other plans. He sidestepped, throwing his axe to his other hand, and grappled onto the monster's neck as he tried to swing himself over up on top of it. But try as he did, the bird shook and shook him off before he could throw himself over the thing. He staggered back, nearly falling to the ground as he slashed his axe. The creature backed away with each strike, dodging acidic ooze now coating the ground. It reeled back and pounced forward, biting and brandishing its talons and striking at Kriv, slashing and biting him. Fish people fell into the corrosive ooze surrounding them, one by one, but 57 only had one in his sight. He lowered his hand to the fleeing priest, letting loose an eldritch blast of his own at the man. It struck true, and he flew back, landing in a pile of the stuff, instantly succumbing to it. 57 ran over and reached down for the dagger, but it hummed, vibrating on the ground in front of him, seemingly shifting in and out of existence. And as his hand approached, it began to do the same until pain overtook him and he was forced to pull back. Instead, he grabbed a cloth from his bag, threw it over the thing, wrapped it up in it, and shoved it in his torso. After all, that was where he carried the belongings of his that he didn't want to lose. Meanwhile, V gave one final pull, this time jettisoning Bonk from the ooze, but he flopped over on the floor beside him dead. He cast invisibility on 57 and himself and fled the cave, Bonk in tow. But Kriv was still locked in combat with the bird. He had retreated with his back against the wall. Everywhere else is now covered with the ooze and fallen fish people. He had no way of catching up with the others, or so he thought. His feet left the ground, and he looked at V. You can fly now, V shouted. Come on. V leapt from the ground, delivering one final slash at the beast as it flew up and away out of the cave, and Kriv flew to the side exit that the rest were piled into. They ran from the wreckage, above ground now, carrying Bonk and designating a plot of land. If they were going to leave Bonk, it was going to be at the proper burial. And that's it for this week's story. I'm really happy with how it all came kind of full circle, and I'm looking forward to next week's. As you know, I post new episodes on Friday, so join me next Friday, either pretty much wherever you get your podcasts or on the NPC Dungeon YouTube channel, for a story that takes place during another story that I already told in the show before, The Problem with Side Quests, and for a DM Advice episode where I'll return to my Helping the Game Run Smoothly as a DM series and talk a little bit more about my 3-part encounter structure that I mentioned in my episode and how I structure interesting and engaging encounters. You don't have to have listened to the other episodes in this series to understand it, but I still highly recommend them. I'm going to alternate between my series on immersing your players and my series on running a smooth game for a while, so I hope you enjoy it. If you do, or if you don't, feel free to leave a comment for me on the NPC Dungeon YouTube channel. Until next time, let's learn something.